Is she lost? Coach Brent Maddox didn't lower his voice when he spoke, and he didn't need to. His tone was enough to ripple across the glossy blue mats of the dojo and settle among the rows of students practicing their drills. The question was aimed casually like a stray kick directed toward the slim black woman who had just stepped through the door in faded sneakers and a plain gray t-shirt, but calculated to land where it would bruise. Amara Lewis didn't respond. She walked in with measured steps, her face unreadable. The overhead fluorescent lights buzzed faintly above her as she took in the wide-open floor space, the mirrored walls, the smell of sweat polish, and that familiar burn of tiger balm lingering in the air. Her gaze moved steadily across the room until it found her daughter Nia, halfway through a roundhouse kick in the far group. Nia's movements were clean and sharp, her expression focused, jaw set with quiet determination. On the bench near the wall, Amara took a seat, folding her hands in her lap. She didn't pull out her phone or glance at the other parents. She simply watched. Her posture was calm but alert. Around her, whispers picked up. Two women leaned together behind takeaway coffee cups. One muttered something about her always being so quiet. Another chuckled softly and said she hadn't even known whose mother Amara was until recently. Across the mats, Brent had resumed pacing between students, occasionally stopping to correct posture or issue curt commands. But Amara noticed it the way he leaned in closer to the white kids, when he praised the way he raised his voice when correcting the few black or brown students in the class. Zion James, a small boy no older than 11, hesitated after his third attempt at a high block. Brent didn't miss it. "That's not even close," he barked, eyes narrowing. "You blocking punches or swatting flies?" A few nearby parents laughed, the same ones who always laughed. Zion glanced sideways, his face flushing as he hurried to fix his form. Just one student over a white boy made the same mistake, maybe worse. Brent's tone dropped instantly. "Almost there, Cole. Better. Keep working." Amara's hands tightened slightly in her lap, but her expression didn't change. Class wrapped with the usual commands and bows. Nia grabbed her bag and jogged toward her mother, sweat on her brow and a brightness in her eyes. Before she could speak, Brent was already making his way over towels slung over his shoulder like a sash of authority. "Your daughter's coming along," he said, then added with a smirk. "You ever think about jumping in just for fun?" Amara glanced at him. "Just here to pick her up." He gestured toward the center of the mat. "We do parent-daughter sparring from time to time. Good bonding. Of course, you'd probably need some serious basics first." "I'm not interested," she said simply. Brent nodded as if that proved something. "Fair enough. Not everyone's built for this." Nia's face fell slightly as she looked between them, unsure if she should speak. Amara rested a hand on her daughter's shoulder and turned to go. They'd almost reached the door when Brent's voice rang out again, a little louder, aimed squarely at the back of the room. "Maybe next time you'll surprise us." Amara stopped but didn't turn around. She reached down, opened the door, and stepped out into the cooling evening air with Nia by her side. Neither of them said a word, but Amara could feel it, the weight in her daughter's silence. The disappointment she tried to mask. The hurt she didn't yet know how to name. And behind them through the glass, Brent Maddox stood with his arms crossed, watching them walk away with the kind of expression that didn't hide its contempt. But what he didn't know, what no one in that room could possibly know, was that Amara Lewis wasn't the quiet, forgettable woman they all assumed. And she had once stood in rings far larger with crowds louder than anything that dojo had ever seen. And she hadn't walked out of those rings as a beginner. The following afternoon, Amara arrived early. She slipped into the dojo 15 minutes before class began, unnoticed by most except for a few curious glances. She chose a quiet spot in the corner, near the side wall, away from the cluster of chatting parents. The sounds of slapping mats and quick breaths filled the space as warm-up drills began. Her presence blended into the background, at least that's how it appeared. But from where she sat, every detail was under her scrutiny. She watched Brent Maddox closely. He stood at the center of the floor, directing warm-ups, like a general issuing commands. There was a rhythm to his authority, precise and mechanical, but Amara saw what others either didn't notice or chose to ignore. The same patterns from the day before emerged again, clearer now in their repetition. Every time a white student made a mistake, Brent's corrections were calm, sometimes even encouraging. A firm nod, a patient tone. But for students like Zion, like little Anna Morales, who fumbled a footwork sequence, the feedback was different, clipped, irritated, and delivered with the kind of edge that left no room for dignity. Brent's voice cut across the floor. "Zion again. What part of pivot first don't you understand?" The boy flinched and tried to reset his stance. His movements were stiff now, full of panic instead of practice. Just one mat over a blonde-haired boy made the same error. Brent only gave him a half shrug and said, "You'll figure it out." No one else reacted. A few of the white parents offered faint smiles at Brent's toughness, as if it were simply part of the craft, a necessary brutality to sharpen skill. But Amara saw something different. Humiliation mistaken for discipline, inconsistency masked as rigor. Her jaw tightened, but she remained seated. She knew the weight of overreacting in spaces like this. She had seen how quickly calm protest turned into accusations of aggression. So instead, she sat still observing, committing every double standard to memory. When it came to time for partner drills, Brent announced they would rotate sparring pairs. Amara's ears perked up. Nia was paired with a boy slightly taller than her, probably 17. As the drill began, Amara watched Nia execute a clean front kick, smooth controlled, just as she'd practiced at home. Her partner stumbled a step back, caught off guard. Brent noticed. He marched over, narrowing his eyes at Nia. "Sloppy," he snapped. "You kicked too early." Nia blinked. No talking. Just reset." Amara's hand slowly closed into a fist beneath the fabric of her loose coat. She said nothing, but her eyes burned into Brent's back. Nia nodded, her lips pressed tight. She reset her stance, said nothing, and started again. Later, as the class came to a close, Brent brought everyone into a circle around the mat. He wiped sweat from his brow and gave one of his trademark half smiles. "We're going to do something a little different at the next session. A quick exhibition, a fun one. Let's see how parents stack up next to real martial artists." Amara felt the shift in the room before he even looked at her. "Miss Lewis," he called out loud enough for everyone to turn. "Since you've been so dedicated to attending class lately, maybe you'd like to participate. Just for fun." Nia turned sharply, eyes wide with panic. Brent's tone was mock polite, but it carried a sneer beneath it. A light spar. Nothing serious, but a great example for the kids. Sometimes it's good for them to see what happens when training meets, well, the lack of it. A few chuckles rose from the front row of parents. Nia looked mortified. Amara didn't blink. Her voice came out cool and steady. "If I agree, what are the terms?" Brent raised a brow, caught off guard by her calmness. "Terms." "Yes," she said. "If you win, I'll admit I know nothing about martial arts." In front of everyone. There was a ripple of amusement around the room now. Brent folded his arms, playing along. "And if by some miracle I lose," Amar's eyes didn't move from his, "you apologize. To every student you've treated unfairly. Every parent you've ignored. You own what you've done." The dojo fell into sudden silence. Brent's smirk cracked just slightly, but he nodded. "Deal." He extended a hand toward her. Amara didn't shake it. She just gave a single precise nod. Around them, the mood had shifted. The kids sensed it. The parents felt it. Something had been set in motion, something none of them fully understood, but all would remember. The next day arrived with an air of anticipation that hadn't touched Master Kim's dojo in years. Word had spread far beyond the usual parent circle. Students arrived early. Parents lingered longer than necessary by the cubbies, their conversations hushed, but eager. Even a few alumni who hadn't stepped foot in the building for months found reasons to return that afternoon, pretending it was just a routine visit. Brent Maddox stood in the center of the main mat, arms folded over his chest. He had changed into a fresh white guy, his black belt tied higher and tighter than usual. His posture was stiff, his gaze sweeping over the crowd like a man scanning for threats, but refusing to show it. Amara hadn't arrived yet, and the space seemed to tighten with her absence. Nia stood near the edge of the room, her shoulders rigid, her hands nervously wringing the ends of her sleeves. Zion stood beside her, fidgeting in silence. Then the door opened. Amara stepped in without fanfare. Same sneakers, same gray shirt, no gym bag, no gloves. She moved with the same quiet composure as before, her presence steady but unassuming. Yet the room reacted to her like someone had shifted the weight in the air. Brent spotted her immediately. He offered a smile, thin and sharp, right on time. Amara said nothing. She walked to the center mat with her hands at her sides, her steps neither fast nor slow. Liam Tran approached her with quiet respect. He had volunteered to referee the match, though everyone knew this wouldn't be a real competition, at least not in the official sense. The students formed a wide circle around the mat, their knees brushing the floor. Parents remained standing along the walls, murmuring among themselves, casting sideways glances at Brent, then Amara, then back again. The atmosphere was neither celebratory nor hostile. It was charged as if the entire room understood something important was about to happen, though no one could quite say why. Brent rolled his neck and dropped into a ready stance. His tone when he spoke was relaxed but condescending. Let's just keep this simple, yeah? No need to make a mess of things. Amara didn't respond. She gave a single nod to Liam. He looked between them and raised his arm. Begin. Brent made the first move, a smooth, confident sidestep, followed by a low, controlled front kick, meant more to show range than aggression. Amara pivoted slightly, letting the strike glide harmlessly past her thigh. She didn't flinch. Her eyes never left his. He followed with a backhand feint and another sim inward, trying to crowd her space, but again she slid just enough to the side. It wasn't flashy or quick. It was surgical. Measured. She was always where his strike wasn't. The spectators murmured. Brent's smile faltered, but he kept moving. A rapid jab aimed at her shoulder missed cleanly as Amara bent at the waist and shifted her weight to the balls of her feet, her body reacting as if she'd seen it coming before he threw it. No contact, no panic, just control. He moved faster now, adding power behind the next kick. This one whistled past her ribs close enough to stir the edge of her shirt. Still no impact. A few students blinked, leaning forward. The ones who had laughed yesterday were quiet now. Even the parents had fallen into silence. Anytime you'd like to throw something, Brent said, his breath slightly heavier than before you let me know. Amara remained still. You said this was a demonstration. I'm just waiting to see it. A soft rustle went through the crowd. Brent's jaw tensed. He pressed forward with another sequence, low-high kick pivot, elbow thrust, all tight practice movements that had earned him trophies over the years. But Amara absorbed the rhythm as if she'd known it all her life. Each attack found only air. Each feint revealed more of his pattern. Still, she never struck back. Nia sat at the edge of the mat, her eyes wide, lips slightly parted. Her mother, the same woman who always stood quietly at the edges of her world, was moving with a fluidity that didn't match anything she had seen from her before. It wasn't luck. It wasn't chance. It was precision, the kind only years of experience could create. Brent's movements grew sharper, sloppier. The control he once took pride in was beginning to slip, chipped away by frustration. Another high roundhouse, another dodge, another failed contact. His breathing grew louder. His eyes flicked briefly to the watching parents, and for the first time he saw something unexpected: doubt. He barked out a laugh, but it sounded strained. You planning to move forever, or are you scared to fight? Amara didn't answer. Her silence was more effective than any retort. Brent growled low in his throat and charged his feet, thudding hard against the mat. This time his strike came with less control, a broad, spinning kick aimed at her center mass. And for the first time, Amara moved not to evade but to end it. She didn't strike him. She didn't throw him. She simply stepped into his blind side, raised one palm, and placed it gently on the back of his shoulder, just as his body rotated through the final turn. It was just enough. He lost balance instantly, his momentum working against him, and fell hard onto the mat with a thud that echoed off the walls. No one spoke. No one moved. Brent lay there stunned, wind knocked from his chest, the ceiling lights spinning above him as reality settled. A single touch. That was all she needed. Amara took a step back and stood quietly, her hands still at her sides. The match wasn't violent. It wasn't loud, but its message was deafening. She had already won. Brent didn't rise immediately. The polished surface of the mat beneath him felt colder than he expected. Not physically, but in the way it absorbed the silence of everyone watching. For a moment, he remained motionless, staring at the ceiling tiles as if trying to piece together how it had all unraveled so quickly. His breath came in uneven bursts, and the faint scent of eucalyptus and sweat seemed unusually sharp in his nostrils. When he finally sat up, the sheen of frustration on his face gave way to something much harder to mask: confusion, maybe even fear. Amara didn't press forward. She gave him space. Her composure hadn't faltered once since the match began. No raised voice, no need to announce anything. She stood with the calm of someone who had done this before, not just survived confrontation, but understood it, studied it, mastered it. The students surrounding the mat were frozen, their posture rigid, expressions mixed with awe and disbelief. For many of them, this was the first time they had seen Brent fail, not miss a strike or lose his temper, but fail completely in front of them. Liam glanced toward Brent, uncertain whether to call the match or wait for some unspoken signal. Brent waved him off with a sharp flick of the hand and stood. His body moved, but not with confidence. It was stiff now, guarded. The arrogance he carried so easily before had slipped behind clenched teeth and a rigid jawline. "I wasn't ready," he muttered under his breath. Amara tilted her head slightly. "We can go again." Brent's head snapped up, eyes narrowing. He hesitated only a second before nodding. "One more, let's make it count." The room tensed again as he took his stance, but something in the air had shifted. His movements were more aggressive now, but less refined. He launched toward her with a flurry of rapid strikes, a low jab to distract a spinning elbow, meant to catch her off guard, followed by a fast inside leg kick with real force behind it. But Amara's body absorbed the rhythm of his assault like water around stone. She deflected what needed deflecting, slipped past what needed evasion, and planted her feet when necessary, never shaken, never caught flat. There was no showmanship in her technique, no flashy strikes or dramatic blocks. Every movement was calculated, quite efficient. Her control radiated the kind of power that didn't need to prove itself because it had already done so long before this room, long before this match. Brent's strikes began to falter. The rhythm of his breathing shifted from aggressive to strained. The sweat on his neck was no longer from warm-up exertion, but from a growing sense of panic. He couldn't touch her. Every attack opened him wider. Every missed strike chipped away at the illusion he had wrapped himself in for years. Finally, with a wild, desperate energy, he threw a high hook. Amara ducked easily and pivoted behind him, her hand brushing his back again, not enough to harm, but enough to show that she could have ended it again. Brent stumbled forward, catching himself just before his knee hit the mat. The spectators exhaled collectively as though they'd been holding their breath for minutes. A few clapped. Others stayed silent, unsure of whether it was admiration or shock that anchored them in place. Amara stepped back, her body language firm, but never taunting. She made no declaration. Her expression said everything that needed saying. Brent didn't look at her as he straightened again. He scanned the crowd instead, his gaze bouncing from one face to the next, searching for support for someone still on his side. But what he found was unfamiliar discomfort, hesitation, disbelief. From the edge of the mat, Naya stood. She hadn't moved the entire time, but now her shoulders were squared, her chin held a little higher. She wasn't smiling, but her eyes shimmered with something clear and proud. She wasn't looking at Brent. She was looking at her mother, the woman who had walked into this place invisible and turned the entire dojo on its head without raising her voice or breaking a sweat. Coach Liam said quietly, almost reluctantly, "I think we can call it there." Brent didn't argue. Amara turned to face him, her tone composed. "You remember the terms." He didn't respond right away. The pause dragged long enough to become uncomfortable. Murmurs stirred again, but he held up a hand, not in resistance, but in surrender. "I remember." The words were stiff, as if they scraped something raw on the way out. Amara nodded once. She walked calmly off the mat, past the stunned students, past the speechless parents. As she neared the bench where Naya stood waiting, the crowd instinctively parted to let her pass. The same people who had whispered about her only days before now stepped back in silence, not out of fear, but out of respect. She didn't linger. She placed a hand gently on Naya's shoulder, and the two exited together, their steps in sync. And Brent Maddox, once the undisputed center of that dojo, stood in the middle of the mat, no longer sure who was watching him or why it mattered so little now that she was gone. The dojo emptied slowly that evening. Conversations were quieter than usual, as if everyone was still unsure what they had just witnessed. A few parents gathered near the front, whispering in tight circles. Some glanced toward the office door, where Brent had disappeared minutes earlier, but no one followed. Students trickled out their voices, subdued, some clinging to gym bags with distracted hands, others deep in thought as they walked beside their parents. The energy in the room had been altered, and no one quite knew how to reset it. Back home, Amara stood at the kitchen sink, rinsing rice while the muted hum of the stovetop filled the silence. Nia sat at the table behind, her arms crossed loosely on the surface, head tilted, watching her mother. There was a question in her eyes, one she hadn't spoken all afternoon. Amara hadn't said much after they left the dojo. She hadn't needed to. The car ride had been quiet, but not heavy, the kind of silence that breathes rather than suffocates. "Where did you learn to do that?" Nia finally asked, her voice soft but steady. Amara paused with her hands submerged in the cold water. She didn't turn around right away. "A long time ago," she said. "Before you were born." Nia waited, expecting more, but Amara left it there. She drained the rice and moved to the stove, pouring it into a simmering pot. "You didn't even hit him," Nia said after a moment. "But everyone, they looked at you like you'd won a championship." Amara stirred the pot gently. Sometimes you don't need to hit someone to make a point. You just have to show them what control looks like. Nia was quiet for a few seconds. Was he right about the terms? Are you really going to make him apologize in front of everyone? Amara finally turned to face her. He agreed. Whether or not he expected to lose isn't my problem. The words weren't angry, but they carried a firmness Nia wasn't used to hearing in her mother's voice. It was the kind of clarity that came from someone who had spent too long letting things slide and now understood the cost of silence. Meanwhile, at the dojo, Brent sat alone in the office. The room was dark except for the pale light from his laptop screen. He hadn't moved in nearly 20 minutes. A replay of the match played on loop captured from a student's phone, now already circulating in a few private parent group chats. His own movements on the screen looked slower than he remembered. Every missed strike, every smooth, effortless shift from Amara. He leaned forward, staring harder, hoping for a flaw, a mistake, something to justify what had happened. But there wasn't one. He scrubbed a hand over his face and leaned back in the chair, the edges of embarrassment already curdling into defensiveness. He was still the instructor. He had trained for years. He had run this place since Master Kim stepped back. One match didn't change all of that, right? And yet, it had. The door opened quietly and Liam stepped in, still in uniform. He stood awkwardly near the threshold, his brown belt cinched slightly off-center like he had put it on in a rush. "Everything okay?" he asked. Brent looked up, surprised to see him. Liam hesitated. That match, it meant a lot to people. I think some of the kids saw something today they'll never forget. Brent raised an eyebrow. "And what do you think they saw?" Liam shifted his weight. "I think they saw someone who didn't need to yell to be strong, and someone who didn't back down from what was right." Brent scoffed under his breath. "You here to lecture me too?" "No, sir," Liam said quickly. "Just thought you should know some of the parents are asking if Miss Lewis teaches anywhere else." Brent's eyes narrowed. Liam gave a small, respectful bow, then turned and walked out without waiting for a reply. Back in her own living room, Amara knelt beside an old wooden trunk tucked away behind a bookshelf. She hadn't opened it in years. The hinges creaked faintly as the lid lifted, revealing neatly folded gear beneath a layer of soft cloth. Her fingers traced over the edge of a worn leather glove, then slid beneath to pull out a black and silver championship patch, faded from time but still intact. She didn't pull out the trophies. That wasn't what mattered. She stared at the patch for a moment, then carefully folded it into her palm. The room was quiet except for the sound of Nia moving somewhere down the hall. Amara stood slowly, her reflection caught in the darkened window. The same face she saw every day, and yet tonight it carried the weight of someone returning to something she had long buried. Not out of pride but necessity. Outside, the streetlights flickered on. She closed the trunk and stood still for a moment longer, her hand resting on the top. Whatever came next, she was ready. The next time Amara returned to the dojo, she walked through the entrance, not as an anonymous observer, but as someone every eye followed. The shift in the atmosphere was unmistakable. Conversations paused as she passed. Students straightened where they stood. Even parents who had once overlooked her now watched with veiled curiosity, some nodding and greeting, others offering polite, uncertain smiles. She acknowledged them with a small nod, neither cold nor warm. She hadn't come for recognition, and certainly not for praise. Brent Maddox stood near the back wall clipboard, in hand, his brow furrowed as he pretended to focus on attendance sheets. His uniform was immaculate, pressed, sharp as always, but there was a stiffness in his movements that hadn't been there before. When Amara entered, his eyes flicked up. Their gazes met for a fraction of a second. He looked away first. The class ran as usual, but attention lingered beneath the routine. The energy of the students was higher, more attentive. Zion moved with a confidence Amara hadn't seen in weeks. Anna was sharper in her footwork, less hesitant in her strikes. Even Naya, though quiet, showed a steadiness in her stance that made Amara's chest tighten with quiet pride. The presence of justice, even unspoken, had its ripple effects. Halfway through class, Brent called a break and walked slowly to the center of the room. He cleared his throat, then scanned the rows of seated students and the parents along the walls. The clipboard hung limp at his side. "Before we continue," he began, his voice tight with restraint, "I want to acknowledge something that happened recently. Something you all saw." The room stilled. His eyes found Amara again, but this time they held. "I made a promise to Ms. Lewis, and I intend to keep it." He turned, facing the students now. His posture straighter, but his voice lower. "In this dojo, I've always believed discipline matters, that we learn by being pushed. But I also know that sometimes pushing too hard can turn into something else. There were no objections, no affirmations, just silence. I haven't always treated every student equally. That's on me, he said, and I owe many of you, especially those I was unfair to, an apology. Zion blinked from his spot on the floor. Anna's eyes widened slightly. Nia looked up surprised. Brent looked directly at them. Zion. Anna. Others here, you know who you are. I didn't give you the same respect I gave others. And that was wrong. From this day forward, that changes. He turned back to Amara, not with anger, but something closer to humility. Ms. Lewis, I'm sorry for underestimating you and for the way I treated your daughter. You reminded me what strength really looks like. Amara didn't smile. She simply nodded. The gesture was enough, dignified, complete. The room remained quiet as Brent stepped back. But slowly hands began to clap. Not from obligation, not from habit. First a few students, then some parents. Then others. It wasn't thunderous. It didn't need to be. It was sincere. After class, several students lingered, waiting for a chance to speak to Amara. Zion approached first, his small voice soft but eager. Ms. Lewis, are you a real fighter like from the TV? Amara knelt to his level. I used to be, she said gently. But the most important fights aren't always in a ring. He nodded, unsure if he understood, but proud all the same. Later, as Amara and Nia walked to the car, the sky a soft burn of fading orange, Nia finally broke the quiet. Why didn't you ever tell me? Amara didn't need to ask what she meant. She exhaled through her nose, gaze fixed ahead. Because I didn't want you to grow up thinking strength was about what you can do to someone else, she said. I wanted you to know it's about what you stand for and how you carry yourself even when nobody's watching. Nia looked at her mother for a long moment, then reached for her hand. They walked the rest of the way in silence. Behind them, the lights of the dojo stayed on longer than usual. And for the first time in years, the foundation it stood on felt different, steadier, more honest. Not because of a victory, but because someone finally showed what strength, without arrogance, could look like. Over the following weeks, something subtle but unmistakable began to change inside Master Kim's dojo. It wasn't the drills or the routines, the curriculum remained the same. The change was in the way people moved, spoke, and paid attention. The change was in the pauses between Brent's instructions, in the way he corrected students with more balance, more patience. It was in the way the students of color, once careful not to stand out too much, now took up space with a different kind of confidence. Not loud, not defiant, but solid. Amara didn't attend every class after the match. She came, as she always had, quietly with purpose, and only when it mattered. But her presence now carried weight. Parents who had once avoided eye contact now greeted her with respect. Some offered small words of support in passing, their tones careful, almost reverent. Others simply nodded, understanding that nothing needed to be said. She had changed the dynamic of the place, and everyone felt it. Brent had become more reserved, but not withdrawn. He moved through the dojo with an awareness that hadn't been there before, especially when he addressed students like Zion, Anna, or Nia. The sharpness in his voice had dulled slightly, replaced by something less performative. He no longer barked to assert power, he instructed to teach. It wasn't a full transformation, but it was a start. He knew that anything less would be noticed now. One afternoon during a Saturday open session, Brent surprised everyone by calling Amara forward. We have some younger students preparing for belt evaluations, he said, loud enough for the room to settle, and we thought it might be valuable for them to see what real control looks like, not just strength, but discipline. Ms. Lewis has kindly agreed to help with today's demonstration. Amara hadn't agreed in advance. He had asked her only minutes before class started, his tone cautious, deferential. She could have said no, but something in his eyes, something unspoken and honest, convinced her otherwise. So now, in front of a full house of students and parents, she stepped calmly onto the mat. Nia watched from the side, her chest tight with a quiet anticipation. She had seen her mother perform before, controlled, confident, graceful, but today felt different. This wasn't a match and it wasn't a reckoning. It was something gentler. It was an offering. Brent stood beside her, facing the students. Watch closely, he said. You'll see everything you need to understand about timing, control, and respect, even without a single word. They began. Amara's movements were fluid and exact, her footwork impeccable, her strikes pulled just short of contact. Brent played the partner, not the opponent. He received each sequence as if they were choreographing a dance built on precision and mutual understanding. The students were rapt, absorbing each motion, every pivot and shift, every moment of pause before movement. When the demonstration ended, there was no applause, just the hush of collective focus. Brent turned to the students. Control isn't about holding back your strength. It's about choosing when not to use it. That's what real martial arts teaches. He stepped back and gestured toward Amara. And that's what Ms. Lewis embodies. This time the applause came slowly but with depth. Not out of obligation, out of clarity. Something had settled into place, a truth that couldn't be unlearned. After class, one of the white parents, a man who had rarely spoken before, approached Amara as she laced her sneakers. My son, he's talked about you nonstop since that day, he said. He's different now, focused, quieter in a good way. I just wanted to say thank you. Amara looked up, meeting his gaze. All I did was move, she said softly. No, he replied, you shifted the whole room. She didn't argue. Later, as she and Nia stepped out into the golden haze of late afternoon sun, Nia slid her hand into her mother's without a word. There was a peace between them now that hadn't existed before, not because of the victory, but because of the unveiling. Nia had seen her mother not only as protector, but as truth, and once revealed truth didn't go back into hiding. Behind them inside the dojo, Brent stood by the windows watching them leave. His arms weren't folded. His posture wasn't stiff. He watched until they disappeared around the corner, and then he turned back toward the mat with the quiet awareness that the most important lessons in his dojo had never come from the curriculum, but from the ones he never expected to learn. That evening, Amara sat on the edge of her bed with an old leather-bound folder resting in her lap. The room was quiet except for the faint rustle of leaves outside the window and the soft creak of the house settling into night. She hadn't opened the folder in over a decade. It had traveled with her through 2 apartments, one brief stint out of state, and the last 8 years of single motherhood, untouched but never forgotten. She opened it slowly. Inside were faded photographs, clippings from sports magazines, and 2 worn certification letters, with her full name, Amara Josephine Lewis, printed in bold at the top. One photo showed her younger self standing atop a podium, sweat-soaked and triumphant gloves held high, a small smile tucked under bruised cheekbones. Another featured her mid-strike in an MMA bout, eyes narrowed, her opponent caught mid-reaction. She looked sharp, lean deadly, and completely unrecognizable from the woman who folded laundry in the mornings and drove Naya to school with a thermos of tea tucked in the passenger cup holder. She ran her fingers over a faded article titled "The Silent Storm, the Calm Killer of the Circuit." The nickname had followed her through most of her short career. No flashy entrances, no theatrics. She let her discipline speak. The calm before and after each match unnerved her opponents far more than the strikes ever did. That silence had been her armor and her burden. Amara closed the folder but didn't put it away. She looked across the room at Naya's partially closed door. Soft music played inside, muffled and faint. Her daughter had barely asked questions since the match, just watched, absorbed, and shifted. The way she carried herself had changed. There was a new steadiness in how she moved, how she addressed others, how she looked people in the eye. That more than anything told Amara that her decision had been right. Elsewhere in the city, Brent Maddox sat at his desk, staring at a dojo schedule he'd revised 4 times in the last hour. His phone buzzed with a message from Master Kim, a simple note checking in, asking how things were going. Brent didn't respond right away. He leaned back, tapping his pen against the armrest. The last few weeks had peeled something raw in him. At first it had felt like humiliation. Now it resembled clarity. Every day he watched the way his students responded to Amara's presence, to her balance and quiet strength, and every day he realized just how much he'd missed over the years. Not just about her, but about them. He had spent so long commanding respect that he'd never truly earned. And Amara had walked in, said almost nothing, and rebuilt the meaning of that word in front of everyone. The next morning, Naya rose early. She moved through her warm-ups before school with a sharper edge than usual push-ups, precise breathing measured. Amara watched from the doorway for a moment before stepping into the kitchen. Something had ignited in her daughter, something rooted in more than discipline. It was identity, and it was growing. At school that afternoon, Nia was asked by a teacher to speak about someone she admired. She hesitated at first. Classmates named athletes, musicians, influencers. When it was her turn, she stood in front of the class, the nerves flickering behind her eyes, and said, "My mom. She's the strongest person I know, but not because of what she can do, because of what she doesn't need to prove." The teacher blinked. A few classmates nodded quietly. One girl in the back smiled without saying a word. That evening, Naya told her mother what she'd said, and Amara just listened. She didn't respond with praise or correction. She just placed a hand on Nia's head, brushing back her curls and said, "That means more than you know." Word about Amara began spreading slowly beyond the dojo. Other parents whispered about her at community events, some asking whether she offered private lessons. Others suggested she speak at the youth center. She refused most offers not out of pride but because her goal had never been visibility. Her intention had been to protect her daughter. The rest had followed. But the quiet ripple was becoming a wave. One evening, Brent approached her again as class wrapped up. The students were putting away gear, chatting in low voices, while the last rays of sunlight filtered through the high windows. "I've been thinking about offering a new program," he said, stopping a few feet away. "Something mentorship-based, less belt-focused, more about discipline and mindset. I was wondering if you'd be willing to help shape it." Amara looked at him for a long moment. "Because you need a figure to clean up your reputation?" she asked, her voice even. Brent shook his head. "No, because I saw what happened when the students watched you move, and when they watched you stay still." She didn't answer right away. She watched a boy helping Anna pack up her pads. Two kids who once kept to themselves now sharing space without fear. That mattered. "I'll think about it," she said finally. Brent nodded. "That's more than I expected." As she turned to leave Nia waiting by the door, Amara paused. "If we do this, Brent, it has to be more than symbolic. It has to mean something for everyone in the room, especially the ones who've been ignored." He didn't hesitate. "It will." And in that moment, Amara believed him not because he said it, but because of how he said it. Without defense, without ego, just readiness. Outside, the wind had picked up, slightly rustling the branches overhead as she and Nia stepped into the evening together. Change was in motion, not forced, not announced, but steady. Saturday arrived with the sky soft and overcast, the kind of gray that filtered sunlight into a gentle wash across the pavement. Inside, the dojo mats had been cleaned, the air smelled faintly of lemon cleaner, and a large folding table had been set up near the mirrors. It was evaluation day, not just for belt promotions, but for something new. Brent had formally announced the launch of the mentorship program earlier that week, and curiosity had drawn a larger crowd than usual. Several new faces lined the walls, parents from other neighborhoods, instructors from sister dojos, even a reporter from a local community paper notebook in hand. Amar arrived early this time, not as a spectator, not even as a guest, but as a facilitator. She wore a deep navy gi, simple and clean. No belt, no embroidery, just fabric and presence. As she crossed the mat to greet the students, every pair of eyes followed her, not with the wide-eyed awe of a viral spectacle, but with the focused reverence reserved for someone who had proven their authority by embodying it. She carried herself without weight, but left gravity wherever she walked. Brent approached and nodded, keeping his tone professional. "I've reserved the final portion of today's session for you. However you want to handle it, it's yours." Amara looked out at the rows of students warming up. They were already different, more focused, more aware. Many of them, especially the younger kids of color, now moved like they belonged here, fully confidently, not as guests earning permission, but as rightful participants in something that finally saw them. "I'll do it my way," she said. Brent didn't argue. "That's why I asked." The evaluations began. Students were called in pairs, performing techniques under the eyes of Brent and a small panel of invited black belts. The typical hierarchy of performance followed: nerves, applause, some hesitations, and a few minor tears quickly wiped away by supportive friends. Yet the energy remained grounded. Even Brent had softened his posture. His corrections were quieter now, more personal. He had traded performance for presence. Then came the mentorship demonstration. Amara stepped forward, joining the students in a wide circle. She didn't raise her voice or give a grand speech. She simply called forward Nia and Zion and asked them to demonstrate a sequence of drills. As they moved through the motions, first slow, then fluid, Amara walked quietly around the outside of the circle, speaking only in brief phrases. Discipline isn't how hard you hit. It's how still you can be when others aren't watching. She paused as Nia transitioned into a block and counter sequence. Her movements crisp, her eyes locked in. Strength isn't always loud. It's often found in the moment you choose not to strike. As Zion finished the final combination, Amara stepped forward and adjusted his foot positioning, a subtle tap of her fingers at his ankle. Precision is not perfection, it's patience. The room remained silent, not heavy, simply listening. When the drill ended, Amara turned to the group. "Some of you will earn belts today. Some of you will not. But none of that determines your worth. This space, she said, gesturing to the mat, is only as strong as the respect you give to everyone who stands on it. She motioned for everyone to sit. No ceremony, no flair, just truth. A parent near the back, a mother Amara had seen many times but never spoken to, raised her hand. Will there be more sessions like this, she asked. Amara looked to Brent. He stepped forward without hesitation. Yes, he said. This isn't a one-time event. We're restructuring part of our program. Ms. Lewis will lead one mentorship seminar every month. A few students clapped. More than a few parents nodded. It wasn't applause that mattered. It was trust being offered. Quietly, collectively. After the session, Brent walked with Amara toward the entry hall. His expression was unreadable, thoughtful. I didn't realize how much I'd build around authority, he said, and how fragile it was. Amara gave a small nod. Control is easy, respect is earned. He looked at her then more directly. I'm still learning. She considered his words, then replied, as long as you keep showing up, so will they. At the door, Nia waited with Zion and a few other students. They weren't in a rush to leave. No one was. The dojo didn't feel like a testing ground anymore. It felt like a space that belonged to them, a place that could hold pride without arrogance, power without intimidation, and correction without cruelty. As Amara stepped outside into the mild afternoon air, the clouds beginning to part, she realized something had shifted, not just in the building, not just in Brent, but in herself. For years, she had carried her history like a sealed box tucked into the back of memory, where pain and purpose coexisted uneasily. But now that history had shape again. Not for nostalgia, for use. And that made all the difference. 2 weeks passed. The mentorship program was no longer a trial, it was a fixture. Amara now taught one Friday evening class and one rotating Saturday workshop each month, and word had begun to spread beyond their neighborhood. Not through ads or promotion, but through whispers, through changed posture, through the quiet way children began to look one another in the eye. The waiting list grew. Inside the dojo, something else had shifted. Brent no longer stood in the center of every room. He watched more, listened more, and when he did speak, his voice came without the performative edge. The man who had once measured his authority in decibels now measured it in attention. One night after class, as Amar was cleaning up the mitts and pads, he stayed behind. No students, no distractions, just the sound of Velcro and the creak of rubber soles on the mat. I found the footage, he said. Amara didn't look up, of the fight. He nodded, the original one, back then. She tightened the last strap of the pad and stood finally meeting his eyes. And you were surgical, controlled. I'd seen clips, but watching the full match, it wasn't violence, it was art. Amara gave a half smile. That's not how people described it then. He nodded slowly. I know. I helped write that narrative. I believed it. Silence stretched between them, not hostile but aware. I think you should let the students see it, Brent said after a moment. Not for ego, for context. Amara hesitated. She had spent years hiding that version of herself, believing that detachment was the only way to survive, as a mother, as a black woman, as someone who knew what it meant to be feared before being respected. But now maybe the silence wasn't serving them anymore. I'll think about it, she said. That Sunday, Naya and Amara sat on the couch at home with a laptop open between them. The video was grainy, digitized from an old broadcast, but clear enough. The crowd noise, the announcers, the thunderous chants, and all there. Nia watched in stunned silence as the younger version of her mother stepped into the octagon, calm and upright, facing a woman twice her media coverage and 10 times her marketing push. You didn't blink, Nia whispered. I'd already made peace with losing. That freed me, Amara said. As the fight played, it wasn't the punches or the takedown that struck Nia the most. It was the stillness, the control, the silence between every move. Her mother didn't waste a second. Every action had intention. Every breath was calculated. And when the final blow landed, dropping the opponent in a single clean strike, the audience froze as if stunned, not by the result but by the execution. Then the crowd roared. In the video, the referee raised Amara's hand. Her face remained expressionless. No shout, no celebration. Back in the present, Nia looked at her mother with something new in her eyes. Not awe, not confusion, but understanding. You weren't angry, she said. No, Amara replied. I was prepared. The next Friday before class, Amara brought the video to Brent. If we show it, I narrate it. No sound, no commentary, just context. Agreed, he said. That night, the students sat on the mats, the lights dimmed. The video played on a projector against the far wall. Amara stood beside it, pointing out posture decisions, breathwork, restraint. She didn't glamorize it. She broke it down piece by piece like a surgeon explaining a procedure. Afterward, one student raised their hand. "Why'd you stop fighting?" Amara looked around. "Because no one saw what I was doing. They only saw what they feared." Another student asked, "Do you miss it?" A pause. "I missed being seen for who I really was, not just what I could do." Brent from the back remained quiet. This wasn't his stage anymore. And for once, he looked grateful. Later that night, after the dojo had emptied, a man approached Amara in the parking lot. Mid-40s, clean-shaven, a suit too sharp for a martial arts center. "You're Amara Lewis," he asked. She nodded, cautious. "My name is Derek Walsh. I represent an athletic advisory council. We're creating a regional initiative to fund mentorship-based martial arts programs in underserved communities. We've heard about what you've done here." Amara narrowed her eyes slightly. "And what exactly have I done?" He smiled, not slick, not rehearsed, just genuine. "You reminded people what power looks like when it isn't performative. We'd like to fund you. Not Brent. You." Amara didn't speak for a long time. She glanced back at the building, at the dimmed windows, the echo of footsteps still lingering on the mat. "I don't want a spotlight," she said. "I want autonomy and access, especially for girls like my daughter." "You'd have both," Derek said. "We'll follow your lead." Amara nodded once. "Set a meeting. I'll bring someone with me." He raised a brow. "Brent?" "No," she said. "Naya." And just like that, a new door opened, not because she knocked, but because she never waited for permission. The following week brought a shift that Amara could feel before she saw it. The dojo was humming with energy, not the forced kind of a showcase, but the quiet current of a place where people were no longer just training bodies, but shifting minds. Flyers had gone up about the new regional mentorship program. 3 new girls joined Monday's class. One of them, barely 10, wore a borrowed jai 2 sizes too big and stood at the back of the line, fists clenched, eyes sharp. Amara recognized that look. She'd worn it once herself. During warm-ups, Brent stood beside her, not directing, assisting. "She's from Camden Heights," he said, gesturing toward the girl. "Single mom, walks here after school, says she wants to fight." Amara nodded. "She already is." After class, Naya waited for her mother outside, earbuds in, swaying slightly to music. Her stance had changed. She no longer fidgeted, no longer shrank in the presence of older students or instructors. Something had settled in her, not arrogance, but inheritance. She knew now what she came from, and it showed. "You ready for that meeting?" Amara asked. Nia pulled out one earbud. "Are you?" Amara smiled. "I was born ready. Took me this long to remember." The meeting with the council was held downtown in a refurbished brick building, lined with tall windows and polished floors. No mahogany tables or ego-filled boardrooms, just a circular table, water glasses, and people who for once didn't speak over introductions. Derek Walsh welcomed them in but deferred quickly to Amara. "You're the reason we're here," he said. "We've reviewed your background, not just the championship, but the fallout, the silence, the way the media shifted the story. You never corrected the record." "I didn't see the point," Amara replied. "No one was listening." "Well, they're listening now." Another board member, a middle-aged woman with short locks and sharp eyes, leaned forward. "We want to build something with your name on it, a regional grant, your model, your standards. Training leadership, emotional intelligence, and cultural literacy. We don't want to replicate martial arts schools. We want to transform them." Amara didn't blink. "I won't be a face for someone else's agenda." "You won't have to be," the woman said. "You'll build it yourself." They went over numbers, timelines, site locations, scholarships. But the most powerful moment came when Naya, seated quietly beside her mother, raised her hand and asked, "Will there be training for the teachers too?" Everyone turned to her. "Because it's not just about who learns," she continued. "It's about who teaches and how." The woman with the locks nodded. "That's exactly it." Amara placed a hand on her daughter's knee, steady, proud. When they left the building an hour later, the sky had opened into a late spring light, the kind that makes the pavement glow. Amara stopped at the steps and turned back briefly, letting the image settle. For once, the future didn't feel abstract. It felt rooted. Back at the dojo that evening, Brent pulled her aside. "I heard about the meeting." Amara nodded. "It's happening." He folded his arms, uncertain. "Will this replace us?" "No," she said. "It'll elevate us, if you're willing to grow with it." He looked away, then back. "I want to be better, not for image, for real." Amara studied him. "Then start by hiring instructors who don't look like you, who don't teach like you, and listen when they speak." He nodded. "Done." As she stepped onto the mat, the new girl from Camden Heights stood at the front, this time unprompted. She met Amara's gaze without fear. Her oversized GI sleeves rolled high, her shoulders squared. Ready, Amara asked. The girl grinned, always. That night, as the dojo lights dimmed and the floor echoed with laughter and focused breath, Amara knew something had shifted, not just in this room, but in 100 others that hadn't even been built yet. The system hadn't changed because it asked permission. It changed because someone refused to sit quietly in the back anymore. 3 months later, the mentorship program had grown beyond anyone's prediction except Amara's. Satellite dojos in Newark, Trenton, and Philadelphia had signed on to adopt the model. Local councils provided funding. A quiet movement was forming, one without slogans or sponsors, just consistency, competence, and clarity. The name on the grant was simple, the Lewis Initiative. Amara hadn't wanted it at first, but Naya insisted. They need to know this started with a woman who was told to sit down and stay silent and didn't. Friday evening, Amara stood at the front of the main dojo, a clipboard in hand. She wasn't teaching today. She was observing. The first cohort of new instructors were running their first sessions with Brent, watching silently from the corner. One of the new instructors, a soft-spoken black woman named Patrice, was leading a group of teens through a breathing drill. You don't center yourself after the fight, she said. You center yourself before you even move. Amara watched with a slight nod. Patrice didn't command attention. She invited it. The difference was profound. After class, a tall boy approached Amara hesitantly. He was 16, lanky, with wary eyes and calloused hands. Ms. Lewis, he asked, can I talk to you? Of course. He glanced around. I've been coming here 2 months. I never told anybody, but before this I got jumped. Bad. Couple cracked ribs. I came here to learn how to get even. Amara stayed silent. But then I saw how you teach, he continued. It's not about payback. It's about control. About not being what they expect. He exhaled sharply. I don't want to be what they expect. Amara looked him in the eyes. Then you won't be. That night, she sat in her office, a modest room at the back of the dojo shelves filled with books on biomechanics, trauma recovery, and ancient combat philosophy. She lit the candle Naya had given her, its scent of eucalyptus and firewood curling through the room. She opened her notebook. The next phase wasn't about expansion. It was about endurance. The real fight was always longevity. She was interrupted by a call from Derek Walsh. Amara, he said, we've had some resistance. She raised a brow. From who? A few board members from legacy gyms. They're calling the Lewis Initiative divisive. Some even say it's political. Amara didn't laugh. She didn't need to. Let them call it whatever they want, she said. Their discomfort isn't my concern. Derek paused. They want to request a hearing to reassess the funding. And I said, we don't need their vote. We have the public now. They've seen what happens when you lead instead of perform. Amara closed the notebook. Then let's give them more to see. The following week, she organized an open sparring exhibition. Not a tournament, no medals, just flow form and demonstration. Parents packed the bleachers. Journalists came without being invited. Some expected spectacle. What they witnessed was restraint, dignity, and instruction passed from one student to another. A girl from Camden Heights showing a younger boy how to pivot on his back foot. An autistic teen helping a classmate find rhythm in his breathing. No yelling, no fear. At the end, Amara took no bow. She didn't speak to the crowd. She simply stood to the side as her students bowed to one another, mat lit by the soft light of overhead lamps, like a stage but one without actors. Brent came over, arms crossed. You know this can't stay small. Amara shrugged. It was never meant to. He looked around the room. You ready for what's coming? She turned to him. I've already lived through worse. The difference is now I don't walk into the ring alone. He nodded. And what about the ones trying to stop you? Amar glanced toward the students. They're already too late. The first direct blow came in the form of a cease and desist letter. It arrived not by courier or email, but folded neatly on the front desk of the dojo one morning, slipped in sometime before sunrise. The letterhead bore the name of a prestigious National Martial Arts Association, one that had never once acknowledged Amara Lewis when she was a champion. The message was plain. The Lewis Initiative was infringing on existing intellectual property. The structure of the program they claimed resembled their proprietary curriculum. They demanded it be shut down or restructured under their supervision. Amara read it twice. She didn't slam it down. She didn't curse. She simply folded it once more and walked it into Brent's office. He skimmed it, jaw tightening. This is a scare tactic. I know. They can't win this. Amara looked him in the eye. That's not the point. They're not trying to win. They're trying to drag it out. Slow us down. Brent nodded, then cursed under his breath. You want me to call our lawyers? No, she said. I want to call my lawyer. The next morning, Amara walked into a quiet office building across town hardwood floors, glass walls, a view of the skyline. Sitting behind the desk was a woman in a slate gray suit with locks tied back and wireframe glasses. Her nameplate read, Simone Carter, Civil Rights and Intellectual Defense. "You sure you want to fight this?" Simone asked, sliding the letter across the desk. "They've got money, media ties, political allies. It'll get public." "I'm counting on it," Amar said. That afternoon, Simone filed a public response. She cited case law, historical precedent, and discrimination patterns, particularly how certain traditional institutions gatekeep under the guise of intellectual integrity. She didn't just defend the Lewis Initiative, she indicted the systems that had ignored it for decades. Within 72 hours, the story broke. Headlines read, "Former champion turned mentor, battles elite organization in fight for equity. Amara Lewis calls out Martial Arts Association for silencing reform." And then the support came not in dollars, but in videos. Clips began circulating, students from different dojos across the country holding signs that read, "I am the initiative," or demonstrating techniques they'd learned under Amara's method. Girls, black boys, kids with disabilities, refugees, former juvenile detainees. They weren't just learning to fight. They were learning not to disappear. Amara stayed out of the spotlight. She continued showing up at 6 a.m. and mopping mats before class. When reporters came to the dojo, Brent deflected. "She's not a story, the kids are." But one afternoon, Naya found her mother standing still in the hallway, staring at a screen showing a live interview on national TV. The host was questioning the association's president, a white man in his 60s, about why the initiative posed a threat. He fumbled. "Well, it's not about race," he said. "It's about standards, about protecting the legacy of martial arts." Nia looked at her mom. "You're going to respond, right?" Amara didn't blink, not to him. She walked into her office and drafted a single post. "If legacy means exclusion, then it's not worth preserving. The Lewis Initiative doesn't belong to me. It belongs to every student who was told they were too poor, too angry, too different, too late. We're not just teaching martial arts, we're reclaiming space." The post went viral in under an hour. That night, Amara stayed after class wiping down equipment when she heard a knock at the door. Simone entered holding a tablet. "You've been summoned," she said with a smirk. "To what?" "A panel. Public hearing. They want you to testify before the state athletic board." Amara raised an eyebrow. "To justify existing?" "No," Simone said. "To justify leading." Amara turned toward the window. The street outside was quiet, but inside the air felt like it was bracing for something. She'd spent half her life waiting for permission, the other half apologizing for not asking. This time she would walk in not as a former champion, not as a token, but as a builder of something they never saw coming. "Let them bring their questions," she said. And for the first time, even Brent believed they were never going back to silence. The hearing room was colder than it needed to be, institutional chill, all glass and steel and intent. Rows of padded chairs lined with observers, media, and association representatives. Cameras pointed from the back like hunting rifles. Amara entered without spectacle. No entourage. Just Nia at her side, Simone trailing quietly with a leather portfolio under one arm. Brent watched from the third row, a quiet anchor. At the front, a long curved table of state board members. Mostly men, mostly white, reviewed their notes as if prepping for a deposition, not a conversation. The chair, an older man with thinning gray hair and an authoritative frown, cleared his throat. "Ms. Lewis, thank you for being here. You are here today to address concerns raised by the National Martial Arts Council regarding the structure and implementation of your program." Amara sat. No papers, no laptop, just her hands clasped calmly in front of her. The first question came from a board member in a Navy suit. "Ms. Lewis, would you agree that your program intentionally circumvents existing certification channels?" Amara replied evenly. "I'd agree that it intentionally corrects a certification process that historically excludes people who look like me and students who don't fit your mold." A quiet rustle from the audience. Another member leaned in. "You've publicly stated that the martial arts establishment favors tradition over transformation. Can you define what you mean?" Amara didn't blink. "Tradition isn't sacred if it's used to justify harm. Transformation means re-examining who gets to teach, who gets heard, and who gets funded. Your systems protect legacy. Mine builds future." Simone smiled faintly behind her glasses. Then the president of the National Martial Arts Council himself stood, the same man from the television interview. Ms. Lewis, he began, voice rehearsed. How do you respond to claims that your initiative sows division? I don't, Amara said, standing now. Her voice didn't rise, it cut. You want me to defend inclusion? I won't. You want me to justify empowering students you never bothered to reach? I won't. The question isn't why my program exists. The question is why yours didn't prevent the need for it. The room shifted. A woman in the back gasped. A camera light turned on. The chairman adjusted his tie. Ms. Lewis, please. We're not here to attack. I know why you're here, Amar said. You're here because for once the story didn't need your permission to go public. For once the kids who were told they didn't belong have somewhere to go, and they're not asking for seats at your table. They're building their own. Silence. Heavy pointed silence. From the side row, a young woman stood up, one of Amar's students from Newark. She lifted her voice. I was 17, assault survivor. No one wanted me in their class. Amara taught me to fight without shame. That saved my life. Another voice joined, a boy in a school uniform. I was diagnosed with ADHD, told I'd never be focused enough. She taught me discipline, without yelling, without shame. Then more stood, one by one, a slow rising of voices like a tide. I was undocumented. I was expelled. I was invisible. And Amara, she just stood there, listening, not claiming credit, just witnessing. The chair tried to regain control. This is highly irregular. Simone rose. So was the silence that led to this moment. The board fell quiet, not from shame, from the weight of inevitability. This wasn't a plea. It was a declaration. When the hearing ended, no vote was needed, no judgment rendered. The cameras had already carried the truth far beyond those walls. Outside, under the soft dusk sky, Nia took her mother's hand. You didn't just fight back, she said. You changed the fight. Amara smiled faintly. No, we did. Because the system didn't collapse when exposed. It evolved because someone refused to let it stand unchanged. Autumn settled over the city with a kind of hush, the kind that follows a storm, not of weather but of will. Headlines faded, the cameras turned elsewhere. But inside the Lewis Initiative, the work never slowed. There was no banner declaring victory, no plaque commemorating the hearing, just a slightly worn mat, a set of mismatched chairs, and a rotating group of students who showed up early, late, sore hopeful because something had changed, not just in policy, in them. Amara stood at the far window one morning, watching leaves skip across the street like restless thoughts. A boy practiced his footwork behind her, counting under his breath. Patrice moved between students with a voice that was both firm and kind. Brent brought her tea. You could slow down, you know? She smirked. And do what? Retire. You earned it. I didn't do this to earn anything. He nodded, leaning against the wall. They're naming you to the State Council on Youth Development. I heard. You going to accept? She paused. Only if I don't have to speak in sound bites. He laughed. Not your style. No, she said, sipping her tea. It never was. Nia arrived an hour later with a folder. I found the letter, she said. Amara's eyes narrowed. What letter? The one you wrote after your suspension. The one you never sent. She handed it over. Amara unfolded the pages, the handwriting neat but raw. To the board. You silenced me because I refused to perform. You erased me because I didn't match your image of strength. But strength doesn't need your approval. It doesn't ask for comfort. It simply shows up even after the door is shut in its face. She folded it again. That woman doesn't need to send this anymore. Why not? Because she didn't just survive, she built something. Later that evening, the gym filled for the annual community night. No VIP guests, no speeches, just parents and students and the steady pulse of drums from a local youth band. Food, laughter, stories. A mural unveiled on the back wall, fists not raised in anger, but in balance. Fingers extended outward, palms open. One small inscription at the bottom. We fight for space. We hold it for others. We pass it on. Amara stood near the edge of the crowd, unnoticed for once, her arms crossed gently. She wasn't alone, but she was quiet, a center of stillness. Simone approached. So what now? Amara exhaled. Now we teach the teachers. Months passed, then a year. The Lewis Initiative became more than a program. It became a philosophy embedded in state curriculum, studied in academic circles, modeled in cities far from its origin. It grew not by ambition, but by proof. And Amara, she remained where she began, in the dojo, before dawn hands, chalked breath, measured eyes open. One morning, a young girl entered, maybe 10 years old, shy, clinging to the hem of her cousin's shirt. Amara knelt to meet her gaze. First time, the girl nodded. Amara pointed to the mat. It's not about hurting people. It's about learning how not to be hurt. That afternoon, the girl stayed after class sitting cross-legged in the corner while her cousin trained. She traced her fingers across a framed photo on the wall, an old image of Amara in her championship days, fists wrapped, eyes fierce. She looks angry, the girl said. Amara smiled beside her. She was. Back then. And now Amara said softly, she's focused. Outside, dusk spread like ink across the sky. Inside, the dojo lights glowed warm and steady. No banners, no applause. Just movement, memory, and the quiet, lasting rhythm of a fight redefined not to dominate but to protect. To persist, to pass it on. True strength isn't found in dominance. It's found in resilience, clarity, and purpose. Amara Lewis didn't win by shouting louder or playing by the system's rigged rules. She changed the rules by building her own platform, one that made space for the overlooked, the rejected, and the written off. The lesson is simple but powerful. When institutions won't open the door for you, build the door, and when you walk through it, don't close it behind you, leave it open for the ones coming next. This story reminds us that justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it's found in early mornings in quiet classrooms, in unseen labor. And when enough of that quiet strength gathers, it becomes undeniable. You don't need their permission to be powerful. You need your own definition of victory, and when you stand in it, others will follow.